Privacy is one of the most important aspects of the job of a chief security officer. Certainly, we design our security strategies, our compliance strategies, and our risk strategies, but privacy interacts with all of these. And it's very important that we are familiar with the privacy rules that are out there and that we know how to establish the privacy framework that we want to operate with in a company. So for instance, do we have any responsibilities under HIPAA? Do we have a privacy policy? And if so, do all interactions with our clients comply with the terms of that privacy policy? How often do we review that policy and make sure that it's up to date with respect to the various state and federal laws? Have we properly conveyed our privacy policy to our clients? Do we capture non-personal data in the course of working with our clients? And probably a very important question, and you'll see why as we continue through this unit, do we have clients in California? Privacy limits companies' ability to collect, use, share, and retain personal information. The privacy laws define what we must do to protect the data that we collect. Like, what are the legal restrictions on the use of that data? Can we sell non-public data to a third party? Are there minimum safeguards that we must have in place to protect the data from malicious actors? And what happens if the data are misused? There's an intersection between our security and privacy practices that permeates our day-to-day operations. As a refresher, the FTC, under Section 5, declares illegal any unfair or deceptive acts or practices in or affecting commerce. And unfair practices, as we saw in the first unit, are defined as cause or likely to cause substantial injury to consumers, not reasonably avoidable by consumers themselves, and not outweighed by countervailing benefits to consumers or to competition. As we saw with data security, the FTC hasn't really defined any specific privacy rules, yet they still expect companies to disclose material aspects of how they handle the data and be honest in their statements about data processing. They premise some important principles: transparency, full disclosure, and honesty, but they do not specify the rules on data privacy. However, like security, they have issued a pamphlet entitled Protecting Consumer Privacy in an Era of Rapid Change. It's not legally binding, but it does put forth 5 important principles: privacy by design, simplified consumer choice, privacy notices, access, and consumer education. Notice privacy by design is parallel to another pamphlet they produced that talks about security by design. As you are designing an application, a service, or collecting data, you want to make sure that you design the aspects of privacy into that design. Access is certainly an important aspect of understanding what access individuals will have to data, and consumer education, how the consumers have to, what rights consumers have with respect to the data that you collect. In 2013, the FTC issued another report with best practices for mobile applications, setting up recommendations for application platforms and developers. And you can see here in the guidelines just-in-time disclosures and opt-in consent, particularly when you're collecting things like geolocation data. One-stop dashboards for customers to review content accessed by the apps they've developed, privacy best practice so developers can make privacy disclosures, review of the apps for privacy practices before they're made available to the public, and implementing do not track mechanisms. The FTC recommended that you post a privacy policy that's easily accessible, that makes just-in-time disclosures and opt-in consent for collecting and sharing sensitive data, that you coordinate with the ad networks and other third parties to provide accurate disclosure to consumers, and set up self-regulatory programs to provide guidance on uniform short-form privacy notice. These short-form privacy notices are much easier for consumers to consume and read than are the ones that are just packed with legalese. And the FTC continually looks at how technology changes can affect privacy, particularly in topics of geolocation and biometrics, which we see in many cases today. The Consumer Privacy Bill of Rights was put out in 2012 by the White House. And again, non-binding, and it shows flexible and clear practices that apply to personal data, including aggregations of data and data that's linkable to a specific individual. And there are certain topics that they included in the Consumer's Privacy Bill of Rights, such as individual control, transparency, respect for context, which means that data that you collect will be used and disclosed within the context in which you provided the data. Securing data, access and accuracy, and making sure that consumers have a right to access correct personal data that might be collected inaccurately. Focused collection, meaning you're collecting the minimum amount of data necessary, and accountability, that the consumers have the right to have personal data handled by companies with appropriate measures in place to ensure that they adhere to the Consumer Privacy Bill of Rights.